Hello, everyone. My name is Dane Roberts. Today, I am bringing to you a fascinating site in Bartow County, Georgia. I am an archaeologist currently residing in Georgia. I have a history degree from Georgia State University and an anthropology degree from Arizona State University. And I was very fortunate to begin the examination of this site's artifacts with Dr. Terry Powis of Kennesaw State University in the spring of 2020. So very excited to bring you information about the site. Bartow County, Georgia is located in northwest Georgia within the Ridge and Valley geological province of Georgia and consists of elevations between 226 meters above sea level to 530 meters above sea level. And the soil content and mineral content of the region is all sedimentary with sedimentary rock, with higher elevations consisting of sandstone and chert, while lower elevations consist mainly of limestone and shale. We have several rock deposits in the region, 6 main ones to be exact, those being the Conasauga, Fort Payne, Knox, Chickamauga, Armurchie, and Bangor formations, mainly consisting again of chert and other sedimentary rocks. The George Smith site, or Site 9BR195, is located on the lower end of the elevations at 226 meters above sea level, with a soil content consisting of fertile deposits like limestone and shale, and an annual rainfall of 1,320 to 1,422 millimeters, or 52 to 56 inches. It is also lying on a floodplain next to the Pine Log Creek, which is a creek since it resides within the Ridge and Valley region of Georgia. It is high mineral content, which usually leads to creeks and rivers having high populations of freshwater mussels and fish. It is also abundant in game and forests, as you can see in the picture. Right here we have a elevation map of the George Smith site itself. You can see over here Pine Log Creek, with very close by being the excavation units that were dug by the previous excavations, as well as a couple of other areas taken of the area to give you a general look of what the site looks like. Previous excavations were conducted by Dr. Arthur Kelly of the University of Georgia in 1952 and Dr. Terry Powis of Kennesaw State University in 2010. These excavations yielded high amounts of lithic artifacts, mainly flakes, but also cores and projectile point knives, and a few preforms. Some pottery, but a minimal amount, and no evidence of pit features or middens or even fire-cracked rock, suggesting that there wasn't large-scale occupation here. Using the pottery, however, Dr. Powis and Dr. Kelly were able to determine that the site was dated to the Middle Woodland period, right in the middle of the height of the Hopewell Interaction Sphere. Right here we have the map of the excavation units conducted by Dr. Terry Powis. He conducted 4 excavation units and 9 transect units. Within these units, he was able to find, again, more lithic artifacts, such as lithic cores, which are lithic tools that when you apply pressure to them with a hammer using percussive force, you get flakes broken off that allow you to make tools for the tool process. This is one of those lithic cores that is the largest of the few found. As you can see, it is about 8 centimeters wide. and it consists of very high quality black and milky, creamy white chert. Now, we are not sure what the source of this chert is as of yet, but being its quality, the three possible formations in Georgia that it could be from are the Knox Formation, the Fort Payne Formation, or the Conestoga Formation. Meanwhile, while there were some cores found, the great majority of the lithic artifacts found were lithic flakes, which can be identified with the presence of either a bow percussion or a striking platform, or both. They were divided into three categories, those being primary, secondary, and tertiary, with only 7 primary flakes being found, ranging from complete to flake fragment. Meanwhile, there were much more secondary and tertiary flakes found. However, it should be noted that secondary flakes or flakes that, whereas primary flakes are flakes that still have the outer cortex or outer surface of the original core. Secondary flakes are ones that only have a partial amount of the original cortex of core surface on them. And these secondary flakes consist of only 140 examples, ranging from complete to flake fragment, while the tertiary flakes, or flakes that have no cortex or outer surface of the core left on them, consisted of 545 examples, ranging from complete to flake fragment. There was also quite a lot of lithic shatter, or pieces that break off in the knapping or tool making process, consisting of 370 examples. We also were able to find, they were also able to find examples of Swift Creek pottery. Now, this example here in the picture is from a nearby site, also in Bartow County, called the Leake Site, which is the preeminent Middle Woodland site of the region. But there still were Middle Woodland period pieces of pottery found. This is one of the best examples of Swift Creek pottery. So what kind of pottery did they find? Well, they found Swift Creek pottery and Cartersville check stamp pottery, both of them making up to 28 examples being found. As you can see, that is very much dwarfed by the lithic artifacts found at the site. So what's being done at the site? Well, while there is a significant amount of secondary flakes, and there are 7 primary flakes, all the flakes are very much dwarfed by the amount of tertiary flakes found at the site. So if this was a site of large-scale tool production, what you would find would be generally more secondary and primary flakes, that being that as you're hitting the flake core, you would have more pieces with the either full cortex or at least part of the cortex or outer surface of the core left on the flakes. That's not what we find here. We find a Herculean amount of tertiary flakes. So what that tells us generally is that rather than large-scale tool production being done here, there is large-scale tool retouch being done, or even people from one site where large-scale tool production is being done are bringing preforms or early-stage tools to the site and then finishing them here. So with that in mind, we did find 5 of these preforms. Most of them were broken, though one was complete. 2 were complete, with the best example being in this picture. And what's interesting about it is 2 things. One, it is actually a preform made from a utilized flake, which you can see in the striking platform right here in this area. Another interesting thing is while it's almost complete, it has been discarded because there on the other side that you can't see in this picture, there is a deep scar in it, which could be what's called an aurelial scar or something that happens either when a plow or decay or just simple degradation happens. But it is also, considering it was discarded, it is more likely that it was broken in the tool making process, which makes sense considering this example is made from a sandy red chert that is fairly low quality as compared to the black chert that could have come from the Knox, Fort Payne, or Conestoga Formation. Again, we don't know exactly what the source of this, the chert used to make this preform comes from, but it is, could possibly come from a couple of areas, formations in the area, maybe the Armurchi Formation, as it consists of chert of relatively this quality, but we don't know yet. We were also able to find several projectile point knives, with 3 of them being datable. 2 of them being a Baker's Creek point and a Jack's Reef corner notched point dated to the Middle Woodland period. The third one is very interesting because it dates to the late Archaic period, being a small Savannah River point. Now, what we need to ask is, why was it here? Well, often on archaeological sites, we occasionally come across items that were dredged up in plowing events from modern plows and modern farming. So, is this the case? From lower levels, is this the case? Maybe, but it's a very unlikely in mine and Dr. Powis's minds, because it seems it's from the exact same level and unit as the Baker's Creek point. So if it was dredged up in a plowing event to that level, it would make sense that the Baker's Creek point would be dredged up to a further level. Now, that doesn't mean that this isn't possible, because it could have been dredged up in part of that unit at some point before we made it, before it was made that unit, and the area where the Baker's Creek point was left alone. But again, that considering how large plowing areas are, it's still unlikely. So what is the most likely scenario is that it was some sort of exotic item owned by one of the inhabitants of the area. And this is very common and very well documented in the Middle Woodland period for individuals and settlements to have large amounts of these exotic archaic points, because they felt it connected them to their ancestors. In fact, in some cases, in Florida, they even ritually broke these archaic points and deposited them into mounds and other ceremonial areas. Now, again, is this the reason this was broken and discarded? We don't know. It have just simply broken and from wear and tear and been discarded, but it's also certainly possible that they broke it for ceremony. Either way, it's still very interesting that this was here. So with all of that in mind, what is the George Smith site? Why was it used? Well, the most likely scenario based off of the evidence is that this site is something called a short-term logistical site. In essence, it is a site that is utilized for short periods of times by larger settlements to extract resources for their settlement. So what is the evidence of this? What is the evidence that this is what the site was utilized for? Well, evidence for this type of occupation is usually seen by a lack of pit features and middens, minimal evidence of pottery, and large-scale evidence of retouch of lithic tools, as seen in prominence from tertiary flakes. All of these are something that the George Smith site has. Okay, but is that all? I mean, just because all those three exist doesn't necessarily mean that this is what the site is. Well, this site is also roughly 20 miles from larger sites, larger Middle Woodland sites, such as the preeminent Middle Woodland site of the region, the Leake site, and another site, the Hardin Bridge site. What's interesting about the Hardin Bridge site is, one, it is a larger settlement, but two, it actually does have evidence for large-scale tool production. So it's certainly possible that the first stages of tool production were done at the Hardin Bridge site, and then the inhabitants of that site during winter or fall, when the time for forging came, brought their pre-made tools to the area and finished them up for extraction of resources. And this brings me to my further evidence. The site ticks off all of the boxes for a site that falls within the primary forest efficiency hypothesis. So what is that? Well, the primary forest efficiency hypothesis is an idea in which communities during the Archaic and Middle Woodland era, and even later areas such as the Late Woodland and Mississippian era, would selectively harvest berries and nuts and other vegetables, as well as fish and shellfish, but also would supplement these by continuous year-round hunting of land and water animals. And it was often combined with the cultivation of other plants such as sunflower and maygrass and such. So what are the criteria for something like a site like this to fit within this hypothesis? Well, one of the criteria is that under this hypothesis, the most sought after sites are floodplains with accesses to rivers. Well, that's what the George Smith site has. And then also, it consists of subsistence strategies, as I said, that are a combination of cultivation practices, but also winter foraging practices with heavy exploitation of dense animal populations and lowland vegetation, all of which the George Smith site has. So when we look at all the evidence together and we look at all the boxes that the George Smith site ticks off for both of these hypotheses and categories, it makes the most sense that the George Smith site is a short-term logistical site for these larger sites in the area, such as the Hardin Bridge site and the Leake site. Further investigation into the region needs to be done, of course, such as where the high-quality chert is being sourced from. But for now, this helps us understand how the communities within the Bartow County region were subsisting and living, which is a truly fascinating thing. It's fascinating to find a site that was only occupied for short periods of time. And again, often evidenced by these lack of middens and pit features, and even firecracked rock, which is consistent with more permanent occupations rather than temporary occupations. Again, it still happens in temporary occupations, but it's more common not to. So, I believe this is what this site is, and Dr. Powis agrees with me, of course, until we find further evidence proving one way or the other. So with that concludes the PowerPoint on the site and the presentation on the site. Again, truly fascinating site, and I hope you enjoyed learning about it, and I hope you find the site as fascinating as I do. So with that, I'm going to leave you, and thank you for watching the presentation.